And here to give us a better sense of the distinctions between the common types of dementia is one of the country's leading neuroscientists, Saskia Sivananthan. Welcome back to the show. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so I think when people hear the word dementia, they kind of blur all of the different diagnoses together. So what are the different types of dementia?
Well, I think most people know that cancer is not one disease, right? It's many different ones. They've got different progressions, different stages, and that means different treatments and supports.
Okay.
So think about dementia the same way. There are actually over 100 different types of dementias. People don't realize that.
Wow.
But we're going to talk about the four most common ones. And the one thing I want people to take away from this is that yes, memory loss is the thing that ties all of these dementias together, but the early warning signs are different. And so the earlier you can recognize what kind of warning sign it is and what that dementia is, the kinds of treatments and the kinds of supports you can get are going to be different.
Okay.
So my understanding is the most common type of dementia is one a lot of us have heard about, which is in fact Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
So first of all, what percentage of dementia are these cases and what do we need to know about it?
Yes. It is the most common form of dementia, and about 60 to 80% of dementia cases are Alzheimer's. It depends on the population. And it is the dementia where memory loss is that first symptom. But the way to think about it is this. The person might remember their childhood, but they're not going to necessarily remember what you just talked to them about. So if we get into the science of this, right, if you look at the brain and the part of the brain that's impacted, usually the first part is the hippocampus. It's like that little seahorse shape there. That's the part of the brain responsible for new memory formation. Okay. So that's why the person is going to remember, you know, things from their childhood, but then they're wanting to tell you the same story about Aunt Mary who met you in the parking lot kind of thing, and then forgot that they told you that 3 times. And this is a slow, gradual progression. So people live 8 to 10 years with this disease, right? So you want to be able to plan for that early.
All right. Well, my father had vascular dementia, which is also the second most common type of dementia behind Alzheimer's. So can you explain that? Because a lot of people have asked me to well, tell me about the vascular dementia that your dad had, because I think my dad has it. So here's your answer. So please tell them, break it down for people.
Well, so the thing about vascular dementia is that there are other diseases that cause vascular dementia. What it really means is that the blood supply to the brain was reduced, and then it causes different parts of the brain to die. Those brain cells die, right? And so things that can cause it include a stroke, small vessel disease, right? Multiple infarcts. And the thing about vascular dementia is that it's not always the memory loss that you see first, or sometimes it fluctuates. They're not always having memory loss. It's what we call executive functioning. So it's the decision-making, it's the organizing. So the way to remember that is the person knows what to do, but they don't necessarily know how to organize themselves to do it, right? So if we get into the science of that, one of the examples of part of the brain that could be impacted is the cerebral cortex, right? That's your executive functioning. It's the part of the brain that makes those decisions around what to do next. So if we think like Nona, who makes like her Sunday roast, every week, has been doing it for 30 years, and now she's leaving the stove on, she's like forgetting to put ingredients in, she's missing steps. She knows she needs to make the roast. It's the steps to being able to do that.
So the next type of dementia is one that we might have heard of but maybe don't know a lot about, and it's called Lewy body dementia. What is that?
So Lewy body dementia is not one we know a lot about, but it's still fairly common. And it's different from Alzheimer's and vascular dementia in that the underlying biology is a different type of protein called alpha-synuclein that deposits in the brain. And they're linked in terms of Parkinson's-related dementia and Lewy body dementia. And the thing to remember here in terms of the early warning sign is sometimes there's memory loss, but there's also visual hallucinations that the person experiences, like major sleep disturbances, some motor dysfunction. So it is a very different kind of progression from the other diseases. And the way a person might think about that is some days they're fine, and then other days the world doesn't seem real to them. So the symptoms really fluctuate over time for them. So if we get into the science of what that looks like, the brain stem can be the first part that's impacted, and that's like the most ancient part of your brain. It's the part of the brain that does all the things you don't think about, like breathing, walking, sleeping. It controls all of those. So if that part's impacted, then those are the symptoms you're going to see, right? The sleep disturbances, the motor issues.
Okay, all right. So is there a gendered component when it comes to who is most affected by dementia?
Yes, there is. Unfortunately, women are more impacted by dementia. Primarily Alzheimer's disease. It depends on the other types of dementias. And then, of course, women tend to be caregivers as well, right?
Yeah.
And so for the longest time, we looked at it and went, well, women live longer, so that's probably it, because your risk of developing dementias tends to increase over time. But now we know, no. Women's bodies are much more complicated. We've got menopause, we've got hormones that change over time. Our brain function and physiological functions are different. And so we're starting to understand that a little bit more. I'll give you a quick anecdote here. Women tend to pass the tests that we do for assessing if someone has dementia because our verbal fluency is better. And so we don't pick it up earlier. Women tend to get diagnosed later because we're able to kind of switch the words and find a way to still explain things. And so those are one of the differences that you see in terms of gender.
Okay,
Wow.
good to know.
So the last type of dementia we're going to cover today is called frontotemporal dementia, which I understand actually can appear in younger adults.
It
So
does.
Tell us about this.
Yeah, so actually people in their 40s and 50s can get diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia. That's when they're first diagnosed. And you can imagine, right? These are people who have young families, they're probably still working. And this is probably the hardest dementia because it's not memory loss, it's actually behavior and personality that changes the first. So if we get into the science of how that works, it's the frontal part of the brain, the frontal lobe or the temporal lobe. And there's two variants. There's a behavioral variant and a linguistic or language variant. So the frontal part of the lobe, that's what controls your personality, right? That's how, the vivaciousness that you guys bring to the table that I don't. That's who you are.
Vivacious. So you're so sure.
But that's the part of the brain, right? And the judgment to decide, should I be saying this out loud right now in this kind of situation? So it's the filter. And when that part of the brain is impacted, someone who might have been really diplomatic is suddenly kind of rude or saying things in what might be perceived in a hurtful way. But it's actually the dementia that's impacting them. And memory loss comes much later in the trajectory of that disease.
Okay.
Gosh, maybe that's Kanye West.
I was like, there's a lot of people I just thought about.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, so let's talk about treatments. From our understanding, these are now different kinds of dementia. So do the treatments for each of these vary, and how effective are they?
So treatments are still evolving. We cannot cure any of these dementias, can't even really reverse them. But there are new treatments coming down the pipe. So one of the examples is a new class of drugs that was just approved by Health Canada. The drug is called lecanemab, and that's specifically for Alzheimer's disease. But here again, the reason why you need to know the difference is A, it's only for Alzheimer's, it's not for the other forms of dementia. And you can only access it if you are diagnosed at the early stage of Alzheimer's disease or even earlier at mild cognitive impairment. So that's one of the examples of the drugs. But then there's other therapies like rehabilitative therapy, right? Like if you have Lewy body dementia, where it might be hallucinations or motor disorders that you're starting to see, well, then the kind of therapy you need is going to be different. It might be more physical therapy, right? But
you should talk to your doctor if you have any of these questions.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Saskia, thank you so much for this very important conversation about dementia. Hopefully we helped somebody today.
Thank you.